let's move on to our next guest via Skype. Claudia Rosett is the Foreign Policy Fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Hi, Claudia.
Hi, how are you guys?
Hi, Claudia.
Hi there.
So the Independent Women's Forum hosted an event this week called Tyrants, Terrorists, and Threats to 21st Century World Order. Can you tell us a little bit about this event?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is something where if you want to talk about things where Americans need to come together, since the end of the Cold War 27 years ago with the Soviet collapse, there are a set of threats again rising where Americans, for all our domestic disputes and arguments with each other, need to really start focusing on some of the things that are out there that are a serious threat to our country. And we were talking about some of these, and it was, when September 11th happened, we heard a lot about how, well, terrorism is the major threat. And it had done terrible things. In New York especially, you saw the collapse of the Twin Towers. But we're now looking also at nation states, what we're sort of calling the Big Four: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. They're not on a par. They pose threats in different ways. But we were looking at this as well as terrorism, as well as I'm here to make your day, as well as some of the technologies that have been evolving, especially cyber, where we now have wonderful things in our lives because of all the things that have happened in cyber technology. But we're also, in some ways, much more potential targets for attack.
Hey, Claudia, we got to get it straight. If we don't know the risk, we can't prevent attacks. So we're glad that you're highlighting this. But I'm curious to get your thoughts more broadly on kind of the Trump approach to foreign policy, because I find it very interesting that he's definitely calling for a rebuilding, bigger budget for defense, but he's also calling on our allies to build their defenses and be more responsible. And he's also saying that we shouldn't be in the business of building states and state building abroad. This is such an, it's not the traditional kind of hawkish neocon policy. It almost seems like a hybrid. How would you describe it?
Well, it sort of is. And in the main, actually, I think he's been doing a lot of really good and important things on the ground. We can argue over whether we like his tweets or not, but if you actually look at what he's been doing, we had, unfortunately, under President Obama, I think, a vision for foreign policy that sort of didn't take into account human nature and began to look more and more like the approach to World War II in the 30s. If we don't look at it, it isn't there. If we try and appease people, they'll be nice to us. And President Trump has done things like, to take one of the controversial moves, getting rid of the Iran nuclear deal, where that was received with great dismay and some, among some. I think, as I see it, what he was actually doing was saying this deal will not stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. We've got to find some way that actually addresses the realities. So maybe that's a good way to put a lot of it. Not everything. It's not completely consistent across the board, but in the main, he's been bringing reality back into foreign policy and saying we need to protect this country. It's a tough world. What you just mentioned, asking our allies to pay more, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, where the U.S. is by far the biggest spender on defense, that comes out of your tax dollars. And he's asking things like, could Germany, a very wealthy country in Europe, is sort of please step up and spend on defense the amount that it actually promised. Among other things, if you're worried about Russia, and we all should be at this point, Germany is kind of on the front lines. So that's basically, I think it's been a turn very much in an important direction. It's a direction that may help avert what was looking like a sort of rising chance of war. We can throw a lot of things into this pot, including China.
Well, yes, and we saw the vice president's speech this week about China and saying that it was a greater risk to our democracy than Russia, and talking about China's retaliation. And I believe it was MSNBC put up a very interesting map of the Trump base on the U.S. and then the targets of Chinese responsive tariffs and just the considerable overlap to say China is really trying to turn the dial up on Trump by going after the farmers who are his base.
Yeah.
Do you agree with the Vice President's assessment that China is a bigger threat to democracy than Russia?
I do, in the sense that China sort of has a more substantial base. It has a much bigger economy. It's got sort of, as you go, what is the trajectory? Yes. At the same time, in sort of ranking them like a horse race, I don't quite look at it that way, because these countries work with each other. They learn from each other. It's sort of a network, if you like. You know, axis of evil is kind of went out of fashion. But if this is, if you like, a network of hostility. We had at the Independent Women's Forum conference on Tyrants, Terrorists, on Wednesday, as our keynote speaker, the woman who is the principal deputy director of national intelligence. In other words, she's the career intelligence professional who helps Dan Coates lead the intelligence community and so on. And I had the chance to ask her about this. Do these countries learn from each other? And the answer is, oh, yes, they do. So it's not only that, you know, China may be the more substantial threat, but for instance, China and Russia have been holding, while we've all been debating, you know, having our knockdown dragouts over domestic politics, China and Russia have been holding large joint military maneuvers. That's troubling, because the common enemy there is basically us.
Well, Claudia, thank you for raising this important issue for us. We appreciate it. We hope you'll come back soon.
It was a pleasure to join you. Thank you.
Thanks.